Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 98 of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The committee is meeting today to study the question of privilege related to the Speaker's public participation at an Ontario Liberal Party convention. Just a reminder that care must be taken. Please don't have your earpieces near the microphone. All comments will go through the chair. The clerk and I will maintain a consolidated speaking list. We have with us today Eric Jantz, acting clerk of the House of Commons. Just so we know, this committee has the power to remove acting from his title, and just to be a little bit biased and share it, I hope we do. Michelle Bedard, interim law clerk of the Parliamentary Council, Office of the Law Clerk in Parliamentary Council, and Jeffrey LeBlanc, acting deputy clerk, procedure. I understand one person's bringing comments, and you will have up to 10 minutes for those comments. The time starts now. Welcome to PROC. Clerk.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to thank you and members of the committee for inviting me to appear today to discuss the question of privilege that is being debated right now. I hope that my testimony will be useful to the members of the committee in its deliberations on the question of privilege that was sent by the House. The contribution that I would like to bring today to the study of the committee contains general observations on the role of this committee. I would provide information that could be useful to the committee in its review of the matter.
The House determined that the matter required further examination and that your committee was the most appropriate forum to do so. Usually, when considering a question of privilege, a committee first seeks to determine the facts surrounding the events in question. It can then assess whether those events constitute, in its opinion, a breach of members' privileges or a contempt of the House. Finally, it can examine corrective measures, if any, to be proposed in the circumstances. This is, in fact, what the order adopted by the House on December 6 is calling for. It goes without saying that the House itself will ultimately decide whether its privileges have been breached and what action is appropriate in the circumstances. Invariably, by the nature of our parliamentary and electoral systems, speakers have to walk a tightrope, balancing their duties in the chair, their role in representing the interests of their constituents, and the fact that they are still members elected under the banner of a party. This challenge is perhaps even greater in the age of social media. Le règlement de la Chambre n'offre pas de cadre.
The standing orders of the House don't provide a framework for the concept of impartiality of the speakership, nor for any other role the Speaker may have outside the chamber. As for the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, it has probably never been asked to consider a question of privilege arising from the conduct and actions of a Speaker.
The Canadian legislatures may provide a few areas to think about. I'd like to put forward for your consideration a 2016 study by the Standing Committee on Rules, Regulations, Private Bills and Privileges in Prince Edward Island. The committee did a comparative analysis on partisan activities of speakers from various legislative assemblies in Canada. On remarque que certaines assemblées ont proposé, dans le passé,
In the past, some assemblies proposed various measures to support the principle of impartiality of the speakership, including adopting resolutions to reiterate the importance of the Speaker's impartiality, prohibiting partisan activities at certain times, before, during, and after a session, and establishing a code of conduct for the Speaker and other chair occupants.
To be recommended regarding the Speaker's actions under review. Only this committee's members can decide, and ultimately the House. It's up to the committee to recommend measures it considers appropriate and provide guidance to the House on how to respond to this matter. I'll close by thanking you again for inviting me to appear before you. My colleagues and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Jantz, for those opening comments. We will now start our 6-minute round, starting with Mr. Cooper, followed by Madame Romanado, puis Madame de Bellefeuille, et puis Monsieur Julian. 6 minutes to you, Mr. Cooper, through the chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. I'll direct my questions to Mr. Jantz. Mr. Jantz, are you aware of any precedent, whether it be in Ottawa, the provinces, or across the Commonwealth, where a speaker has engaged in a public display of partisanship of the kind that we saw on the part of Mr. Fergus?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question, Mr. Cooper. Again, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there have been certain cases in both some of the Canadian legislatures in which there were questions raised about the activities of speakers outside of the House. For the most part, these were addressed via a substantive motion and not via question of privilege studied by a committee. So there are examples, but perhaps not identical to
Are you able to cite any examples?
Well, again, there was the case in Prince Edward Island, where there were questions about the impartiality of the speaker, although I think that might have been more related to the speaker's actions in the chamber, not necessarily outside. I don't know if my colleagues can help me out in terms of some of the others.
We did sort of canvass our provincial colleagues. There was a case in Nova Scotia where, example, the speaker appeared in an ad for their political party, along with other members of their caucus, and that may have given rise to some questions. So there have occasionally been sorts of comments like that about what speakers do, whether attending party events or appearing in party materials.
Thank you. Did Mr. Fergus consult you, Mr. Jantz, about the appropriateness of recording a video tribute to his Liberal friend John Fraser?
Right. Maybe just in terms of a bit of context, obviously myself and the entire House administration are available to provide advice and support to not only the Speaker but to all members. The Speaker also, of course, has his own staff that he can rely upon for advice. We, the House administration, myself, provide mainly advice on procedural and administrative matters. The Speaker's office would perhaps be better positioned to provide advice to the Speaker on more partisan or party matters. But to answer directly your question, Mr. Cooper, no, I was not consulted.
And when did you first become aware of Mr. Fergus's tribute video?
I think it was the Saturday via a tweet from, actually, I believe it was you, Mr. Scheer, and that led then to some exchanges between myself and the Speaker's office.
And had Mr. Fergus sought your advice, what advice would you have provided him?
Thank you again through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cooper, I think my advice would have been to probably not proceed in this manner, or at a minimum to perhaps canvass the parties and to explain that the Speaker's been invited to this event and that he's maybe wondering what he should do, and perhaps seek the advice from the parties as to whether or not he should proceed.
And can you elaborate on why you likely would have advised him not to proceed?
I think, again, in our parliamentary tradition, again, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there's a bit of a tightrope that the Speaker has to walk in terms of still being a card-carrying member of a party and still the importance of being neutral and nonpartisan in terms of presiding over the House and the Board of Internal Economy and the like, and that perhaps this was going a bit too far into the partisan sphere.
So he would have crossed a line. Is that fair?
I mean, ultimately, I think that's for this committee to determine, but my advice would have been to not see the Speaker participate in this video.
Okay. At the table offer chair occupants, including the Speaker, briefings or advice about aspects of their roles and responsibilities upon their election?
It's actually a very good question. It's one of the things we've been reflecting upon over the last few days in terms of lessons learned. We, of course, do, whenever a new Speaker is elected, provide both written briefing material as well as oral briefings to the Speaker and to the Speaker's staff. It's perhaps something we should add a larger section on in that briefing material on the role of impartiality.
So, written and oral materials are provided and briefings to the Speaker, to his staff, and I presume that those briefings would include informing the Speaker about his or her duty to be nonpartisan.
Again, I think lessons learned, that's probably something we could focus more on going forward. Again, it's easy to say looking back. I don't think there's been a whole lot of issues in the past. But Generally speaking, yes, there is obviously a transition that has to be made when one becomes speaker.
And so have there been any such briefings, yes or no?
There were certainly briefings when Speaker Fergus became speaker.
And how many would he have received? And again, specific to being nonpartisan,
Right.
et cetera.
Yeah, no, there wouldn't have been a specific briefing on just that subject. It would have been,
But it would have included that subject, right?
I'm sure we would have touched on it, but again, probably not in as much detail as we will be doing
Okay.
going forward.
With regards to Mr. Fergus's trip to Washington, D.C. last week, was that trip booked through the International Inter-Parliamentary Affairs Unit?
It was.
It was. And when was it booked?
It's been in the works for some time, but I don't know exactly when.
Is sometime a few weeks since he was elected Speaker, before
Yes.
he was elected Speaker?
Yeah.
Before he was elected
No,
Speaker?
not before. No. Because it was a speaker-led trip, so it would have been after he became speaker.
Excellent. Thank you. I will just ask that exchange back and forth, one person speaking at a time, maintain its course throughout the whole meeting. So I would like to not to have to interrupt, but I think that was a great exchange. Mr. Jantz, I know you're not usually the person speaking or receiving attention, but just making sure that our volume is high enough for everyone in the room to hear, including interpreters, without popping their ears would also be appreciated. Mrs. Romanado, one person speaking at a time through the chair.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning, especially so early on a Monday morning.
Us today. I have a couple of questions. In your remarks, Mr. Jantz, you mentioned the 2016 study from PEI, and that coming out of that study, there was a code of conduct established for speakers. You've mentioned that when a new speaker is elected, that they are provided some briefings, whether it be written or in or verbal briefings. And you mentioned also that perhaps those could be strengthened. We're also looking at, how can we make sure that in terms of remedying this situation, that going forward, that any speaker that occupies the chair is fully briefed, understands clearly what the expectations are, and so on and so forth. Would it be possible for you to perhaps submit with this committee that actual document with respect to the study from PEI?
We certainly could. Maybe I can just a small precision. The PEI report, as you'll see when you receive it, it didn't include a code of conduct. It included a recommendation that basically asked or indicated that speakers should abstain from all partisan political activity, including attendance at party caucus meetings, for a period of 60 days prior to the commencement of a session and for the period of 30 days after the conclusion of a session. It was when we looked at other jurisdictions, we did notice the Yukon Legislative Assembly has a procedural handbook for their speakers, which has a few sections on impartiality. So we could perhaps share that section of that handbook as well.
I think that would be very helpful. Thank you. So, gentlemen, I'd like to put this in context. There's been a lot of information flowing around about this situation. We're looking forward to hearing from Speaker Fergus himself later today. The Speaker did not attend a partisan event. The Speaker made a video wearing the robes in his chamber, which is inappropriate. The Speaker did not know, and we're going to clarify that or not, that it would be used or shown at a political event. So there's a lot of people who've come to me and said, the Speaker attended a convention. The Speaker did not attend a convention. The Speaker made a video. Is it inappropriate? Yes. Was it a misuse of parliamentary resources? Probably. We'll get more to that. But I want to put it into context because we have before this committee another point of privilege that we have not been able to complete because of delay tactics, which involved a member's privilege, threats to a member's family in terms of foreign interference. So I want to make sure that people understand who are watching that what we're talking about is a video that was made, probably inappropriate use of parliamentary resources. But what we're trying to do is what happened and prevent it from happening again. and that is the goal of this morning's meeting. Can I ask your opinion on the fact that normally such a procedure would be a substantive motion of contempt versus a point of privilege raised in the House? We have two other cases that would be the precedent, yet the Deputy Speaker ruled that he would allow it. Is this not opening up a new precedent in terms of how to handle such situations?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question, Madam Romano. Normally we don't comment, nor would the Speaker, or in this case the Deputy Speaker, comment on rulings that they make. The ruling kind of stands for itself. I think the wording in the ruling made it clear that this was a pretty exceptional circumstance, which is why the Deputy Speaker ruled in the manner that he did. And again, there's not a whole lot of precedents with respect to this, and you're right, in the past they have been addressed through a substantive motion. But again, if one were to reread the ruling, I think there's some elements in there that explain why the Deputy Speaker decided to go with the ruling that he ultimately went with.
Okay. How much time do I have, Madam Chair? Okay, thank you. So after being elected as Speaker, the member no longer takes part of partisan things. So, for instance, Mr. Fergus is not part of our caucus. He does not attend caucus meetings, and so on and so forth. Would you recommend that extends to meetings and events outside of Parliament?
I mean, I suppose ultimately that's for this committee to dwell on. It's very hard, I think, to enumerate all the different activities, because I think everybody realized that the speakers are still the elected representative for their constituency. They have certain roles and responsibilities to play there. AGMs for the party versus fundraising events versus just meeting with community stakeholders. There's, I think, a range of activities, and it's maybe something this committee would want to spend some time thinking about. Are there any of those activities that it should be impressed upon that speakers should not be involved with, or that based on practice to date, those would be allowed?
And actually, during debate on this privilege motion in the House, one of the members of the Conservative Party, who I have a lot of respect for, brought up the issue about in the UK, there was a recommendation perhaps that maybe a speaker run as an independent in a subsequent election because of the fact that they need to show impartiality. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, if that's something you think that we should look into?
I mean, just very quickly, it's certainly the long-standing practice in the UK that speakers, once elected, then become independents and usually run then. The other parties don't put up candidates in their riding. Other jurisdictions have other ways of doing it as well. In Ghana, for instance, the speaker is either somebody from the outside, or if it's a member of the elected assembly that's become speaker, that person quits as an MP. So there's different options that could be considered.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madame de Bellefeuille, 6 minutes. Permis.
Ms. Bellefeuille, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. Jans. I will speak more slowly than usual so that my colleagues who don't understand French understand me, and to make the work easier for the interpreters. I listened to what was said earlier, especially by Ms. Romanato, my colleague, and I don't really share her opinion, and that today we are dealing with a motion that was adopted unanimously in the House. If you don't mind, I'm going to just read a bit of that motion. It says that, in fact, there was a serious lack of judgment that was expected. So this isn't a minor incident, because it is a serious one. It was so serious that this motion was adopted unanimously. All parties, all members felt that it undermined the confidence of the House. So have I really understood the seriousness of this motion? Thank you very much, Ms. Bellefeuille, for that question. When it comes to a question of privilege, there are always two stages. First of all, the Speaker, in this case the Deputy Speaker, looks at the subject matter and decided that it should take precedence over all others. And as you said, then it is up to the House to determine whether they're going to pass the motion. And in this particular case, yes, It was passed unanimously, and it was determined that this matter should be referred to this committee. And it says in the motion that the matter was serious enough because it undermined the confidence of the House. And you said a number of times to my colleagues that you didn't find that there was any precedent to this. You looked, you found similar situations, possibly in other legislative assemblies, but never in Parliament. I think the incident is such a major one that this is a serious lack of judgment, and perhaps that is why there isn't any precedent. Does that mean that today our recommendations, the study that we are carrying out, is going to become something for you, the people who are going to manage this precedence, that the decision that we make today after our study is going to become jurisprudence? Well, again, in terms of procedure, this committee is going to prepare a report and submit it to the House, and it will be up to the House to determine whether they want to adopt the report, i.e. the recommendations that are in the report, and if that is the case, that will certainly change our practices. So the decision that we have to make, the recommendations that we have to make are going to be very important, because based on those recommendations and decisions, we are going to have an effect on how future incidents would be managed. Yes, it will certainly help the speakers in the future and anyone else who has to make a decision. Well, I participated in your interview, and the questions that we asked you were based a lot on the importance of being impartial. When Mr. Fergus made his video, did he consult you? When you're a new speaker, because I think it's quite rare that a speaker goes from a member of Parliament to speaker. Normally, there's a stage where you are deputy speaker to get an idea of what it's all about and to do the work, and then you move on to becoming speaker. So the first reflex of a new speaker would be, or should be, to ask for some advice of his right-hand man. And of course, that's what you are. Did he ask you for any advice before making this video in his speaker's chambers and in specifying that the speaker was going to be used and shown to a partisan public? Did he ask you for any advice, you, his right-hand man? Thank you for the question. As I answered to Mr. Cooper when he asked a similar question, no, I was not consulted. But us and the clerks of the House were asked questions of House procedures. We're asked a lot of questions about political matters and things that pertain to political parties. So this isn't necessarily something we can get consulted about. It's often from employees who work directly for the Speaker. Well, if your relationship with the Speaker had been a little bit stronger, you've only been working together for 2 months now, if he had consulted you, if he had said, Mr. Jans, what do you think of this? I have an old friend who's leaving politics. I want to honor him. I want to do something nice for him. What would you have told him? Once again, as I said to Mr. Cooper, I would have consulted him to not to make this video, or at the very minimum, to consult all other parties and say, look, I've received this request. What do you think? We think that based on the motion that was passed, that the confidence of the House has been undermined. I don't want to consider this event as being minor in nature. It's serious. I didn't hear the Speaker apologize for making this video. In the House, it was said that he was upset that was interpreted in this manner. Do you think that the Speaker actually apologized for his lack of judgment? Well, that's a very tricky question. It really is up to each individual to determine whether that was an apology or not. Perhaps that's a question to ask of the Speaker, not of me.
It's to you through the chair.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much to our witnesses, Mr. Jans and Mr. Bidal. Thank you very much for coming this morning. This is indeed a motion that was passed in the House that deals with a serious error in judgment that undermines the confidence of the House in its Speaker. This is indeed something very serious. I would urge this committee to take this very seriously, and that is why we asked you to appear today. Mr. Jans, you said that if you had been consulted, you would have said, no, that's going too far. You mustn't proceed in this manner.
If you were consulted after Saturday night, after the video was broadcast, was there contact from the Speaker's office, from Speaker's staff, from the Speaker himself, asking for advice?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question, Mr. Julian. There were some exchanges starting that weekend between myself and the Speaker's office in terms of what next, which led then in large part to the Speaker's statement on the Monday morning when the House opened.
So it was about the framing of the apology or the framing of the response, or was it a after the fact request for what the precedence is around impartiality and nonpartisanship?
The discussion was largely focused on next steps, with the suggestion that if the Speaker so desired, could make a statement at the opening of the House.
Would you be willing to share those emails with the committee today?
If this committee directs us to do so, we certainly could.
Thank you. You mentioned oral and written briefings. The written briefing, in how it touches on nonpartisanship and impartiality, what is specifically shared with the Speaker when the new Speaker came in?
Again, as mentioned in response to earlier questions, I think that's a lesson learned for us. I don't think there's much in terms of discussion text on impartiality of the Speaker in the written briefing material that we provide. It's never really been an issue in the past, but certainly going forward, I think we will be beefing up that section. So, no, it was pretty minimal.
Would you be willing to share the written briefing to the Speaker with the committee today? I say today because the timelines are very short, as I know you're aware. Would you be willing to share those briefing? Thank you. Thirdly, the Washington trip, was it scheduled under the former Speaker Rhoda?
No, this was a trip that the current Speaker initiated upon becoming Speaker. I understand he had already hoped or planned to go to Washington and then made it into an official IIA-led exchanges visit.
Do you know when that trip was initiated? How soon after the Speaker's election?
It was pretty quickly after the Speaker's election that he mentioned it to us that he would like to go to Washington during those dates, and that then put into motion the preparation of the trip in question.
So within days?
Days, or I'd say within 2 weeks maximum, probably, we were made aware of the Speaker's desire to go to Washington.
Okay. Thank you for that. You've cited the precedents around Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, also the Code of Conduct in the Yukon Territory. Within the examples you've cited with Nova Scotia and PEI, what were the remedies or consequences? Remedies in terms of ensuring nonpartisanship and impartiality, or consequences of a Speaker violated those fundamental principles of impartiality and nonpartisanship?
Again, we'll be distributing this material further to the request from Ms. Romanado. The Prince Edward Island example, their committee, equivalent to your committee, adopted a resolution or recommendation that speakers should abstain from partisan activity, including caucus attendance, 60 days prior to the commencement of a session and 30 days after. So that was the recommendation in their report. Yukon, they had prepared a memo that went on for some length in terms of outlining certain things speakers should not and should do, shouldn't do. For example, there's one Publications of the Speaker's party and caucus should not include photographs of the Speaker in the Speaker's robes. But again, we will circulate those documents.
But what are the penalties for transgression? If a speaker is photographed in their robes and that photograph is connected to a partisan event, what are the consequences or the remedies to that, either in Nova Scotia or Prince Edward Island or Yukon?
I'll ask my colleague Jeffrey to respond.
In some of the cases we've seen, we asked our provincial colleagues what sort of happens if concerns have been raised, and in some cases there have been motions brought forward condemning the Speaker's action or expressing non-confidence in the Speaker in some of those legislatures. I don't believe there were any cases where those motions were adopted. In some cases the Speaker may have apologized and that settled the matter. In other cases the motions were just never completed or they were voted down. But those are usually the way that those things have been handled.
In all of these cases, were these majority legislatures or minority legislatures?
I don't know that off the top of my head, sir.
Thank you. We'll now go into our second round. Mr. Duncan, suivi par Monsieur Lauzon. Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to our witnesses. Thank you for being here. I want to follow up with some questions on the Washington, D.C. trip. You had mentioned the trip was booked through the International and Interparliamentary Affairs Unit. Usually when the Speaker travels, there's a delegation of MPs, one from each recognized party, that would go. Was that done? And if not, why not?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Madam Chair. Mr. Duncan, you're right. Often when speakers go on delegations or on official visits, they will bring a delegation composed of representatives from each of the parties. That's not always done. We've seen, for example, past speakers go on shorter trips, for instance, to visit one of the provincial counterparts, and that would not.
Do we know why the decision was made in this case not to?
Probably because of the length of the visit, but it's maybe a question for the Speaker at 9:30.
Did Mr. Fergus take any staff from the IIA unit with him?
Washington, no.
Is that not unusual for a Speaker traveling abroad on a trip like that to have staff from the IIA?
Again, if it's a longer, perhaps more complicated trip with more meetings, then absolutely we send one of our exchanges officers. Again, if it's a smaller, shorter trip, again, either within Canada or in cases like this to Washington, it's not unusual.
Who accompanied Mr. Fergus to Washington, D.C. then?
I believe it was his Chief of Staff and his Director of Events.
Does the International and Interparliamentary Affairs Unit have a copy of Mr. Fergus's Washington itinerary?
Yes, because they would have been very involved in preparing it.
Would you be able to table that with the committee, the details of that agenda?
The official program, you
Yeah.
mean? Again, if it's the direction from this committee, we can produce that.
That would be appreciated. Did Mr. Fergus meet with his counterpart, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, while in Washington, D.C.?
I believe it did happen at the last minute. It wasn't confirmed when the Speaker was leaving, but I believe that meeting did happen finally. Yeah.
Is it unusual for a Speaker to travel abroad during a sitting week?
Unusual, but not completely unprecedented.
And it would note about kind of why the decision was made for last week and planned for last week for those dates. And the reason I say that is in January, when our House is not sitting and the U.S. House is in session there's several weeks in January that would not have provided a conflict to be there. Was there any discussion about moving that to January or a time when the House was not sitting?
I don't know how much discussion there was because I think there was an event that the Speaker had already planned on attending, so the idea was to build the visit around that. But again, those are perhaps questions better put to the Speaker at 9:30.
Mr. Fergus attended a retirement party of some sort in Washington, D.C. for a Klaus Graham cow. Were you aware of the Speaker's attendance as part of the itinerary for that trip?
Yes.
The comments, you saw the video, the excerpt of the comments he made at that party?
Yes.
And I'll just remind that he was speaking about his history once again in a partisan fashion, about his time as president of the Young Liberals and his election and how he was going to win that election back in that day, and sharing how Mr. Graham Cow was connected and all that. You mentioned the video was inappropriate in his role as Speaker. I would assume that his comments on a Speaker delegation to Washington, D.C. speaking at an event, public or a video, would be inappropriate. Would you say that's another inappropriate comment made by the speaker on this trip?
Decision, Mr. Duncan, I didn't say that the video was inappropriate. I said that I would have advised not to do the video.
I'll reword my question to say you said he should not have done it. Would your advice been, knowing this, that he should have not made these comments at the event as well?
I think that's a fair remark, yeah.
So if I were just to conclude on this, you've said that it would not, if your advice and knowing ahead of time, you would have advised him not to make the video to the Ontario Liberal Party convention. Would you have advised him not to make the comments that he had made in his interview with the Globe and Mail, where he had cited the Ontario Liberal Party as our party? Would you have advised him not to do that or to say that?
Again, normally we're not sought for advice in terms of political or party events. So, again, I've never really been sought counsel on a question like that. It's really hard to answer, to be perfectly honest, Mr. Duncan. Yeah.
And I think what I would say there, where I'm going, is not only the advice to say to not partake in the video, to partake in Washington, D.C. at this retirement party, to go and speak in a partisan fashion about his history with the Young Liberals of Canada and so forth there. And again, the advice not to engage in partisan by referring to our party, the Ontario Liberal Party. Just wanted to make sure we were on the record for all three of those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur Lauzon, 5 minutes permis la présidence.
5 minutes through the chair, please. Thank you very much for appearing this morning, Mr. Jans. The House is determined that it's very important to deal with this matter very quickly. The committee's responsibility is to make recommendations. We are not in a position to impose any sanctions. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about that. Yes, thank you very much for your question, Mr. Lauzon. As mentioned, when I answered Ms. Bellefeuille, this committee must make some recommendations that are going to be included in your report. It must be tabled by Thursday at the latest, and then it is in the hands of the House. They have to adopt the report and determine what should be done. If there are recommendations that are in the report, then the House has to approve them. You said that this is an unprecedented situation. There is no jurisprudence. But, Mr. Jans, when you say that you would have recommended that Mr. Fergus not make that video, but if that had been for a friend, it wouldn't be public, and it was just to thank one person, would you have made the same recommendation? Well, it's very difficult to say because I wasn't consulted. It's very difficult to talk about nuances. Difficult to say what the speaker should have worn or not worn. I think we probably would have recommended not to do it at all, but the other option would have been to consult all parties to see what they think. Well, my question, Mr. Jones, is really the following. Regardless of the position that a member holds, just a backbencher or other, well, we have all done this. We've congratulated people, regardless of the party, regardless of the level of government, municipal, provincial, federal. Why would the speaker have had to ask for permission to send a video to someone? Is there something in the regulations that says that he has to consult you to record a video to send it to a friend, a personal video? Well, it's a good question. There's nothing codified in the House rules regarding the behavior of the speaker. It's really a question of practices over the past 150 years or so. Do you have anything to add? Well, I think that the question we should always ask ourselves is that the speaker is expected to remain impartial, and so the question to be asked, as my colleague said, is what is the context in which this message is going to be shared? Is it a video that is going to be filmed at home, or is it in the speaker's chambers, or what? Mr. Jans, I know that this is unprecedented. We don't have any examples to draw from, but when Mr. Scheer spent $3,000 to the Guelph riding in 2011, did Mr. Scheer get sanctioned? I don't remember that. We aren't aware of any sanction that was imposed on Mr. Scheer. Are you aware of that situation? That there was a transfer of $3,000 to the Guelph riding during the election to the office of Mr. Scheer while he was Speaker of the House? Personally, no, says Mr. Jansen. No, I'm not aware of that either. You're not aware of the fact that it was for a robocall? Well, if you have any documents pertaining to that, would it be possible to send them to this committee so that we can append those to the report, so that that could help us make our decision? Well, we can look in our files to see if there is something. We'll see what we can do. No, sorry. No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Lauzon. Ms. de Bellefeuille, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Jans, you said very clearly that if the new inexperienced speaker had been consulted, if there was any doubt at all, you said in English and in French that you would have advised him not to do this video. So what would you have based that decision on? What impact would this have had on his future? Thank you for your question. I think that it is critical for the speaker to remain impartial and always be perceived as such. More so than anyone else, I think that is the justification as to why it wouldn't be a good idea to make such a video. We always err on the side of caution, given the impact that that can have on the confidence of the House. So, Mr. Jans, you're saying that when you're Speaker, you have to act to be unattackable. You have to be able to prove that you're impartial, you are above everything, that you are a person who always has a good judgment. And what's surprising is that if you had been consulted, you would have said no, because there was a huge risk to his reputation and the fact that people might think that he's not impartial. Yes, indeed. As for Washington, what surprises me, and I'm a whip, so I look at what the Speaker does, I have the feeling that it is a mission or a trip that was kind of organized a bit on the sidelines. It's not part of his normal routine of travels. Normally, a speaker doesn't travel when the House is sitting and only travels during break weeks. Do you think that his departure for Washington with his staff right at the height of the session, that shows that he doesn't recognize the importance of what really happened in the House? Well, again, that's a question that you can ask of the Speaker. Normally, a Speaker doesn't travel during the session, but there have been precedents where he has. Thank you.
2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Précédentes qui existent et peut-être il y en a d'autres.
We haven't discussed precedents, but maybe there are some others. I'm talking about the decision-making process regarding the previous Deputy Speaker, Ms. Champagne. Could you possibly tell us a bit more about that? And why, as a Deputy Speaker, she was kind of cleared. But I would like to know what you think of that in relation to the situation with the Speaker. Thank you for the question. The question that you raise goes back to 1993, when Ms. Champagne was also asked to preside the Progressive Conservative Convention. There were questions of privilege that were raised in the House of Commons regarding her participation in this party-related activity. Mr. Fraser, at the time, who was Speaker, said that the expectations of Deputy Speaker are not as great as Speakers, what one expects of a Speaker. So in that case, it was not a question of privilege. There was also a question of the behavior of the occupants of the Speaker's chair, and those were substantive in nature. That was the example that you just raised. So would it be fair to say that a Speaker is subject to different lines that he can't cross when it comes to behavior? Well, the Speaker can't attend caucus meetings, for example, for dozens of years. If the Speaker does not attend caucus meetings, so there is a difference, yes. Earlier on, you said that this idea of having your picture taken while wearing your robes that was shown at a partisan event was stepping too far. But with social media nowadays, you can't share a picture like that in any event, even if it's private, because it can be broadcast. Do you think that social media have changed a lot with regard to the impartiality? Well, yes, I said that in my introductory remarks.
In the age of social media, absolutely.
Merci, thank you. I will now go to Monsieur Berthold for 3 minutes.
Mr. Berthold, 3 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll go very quickly. Thank you, Mr. Jans, for appearing today. The Washington event that Mr. Fergus was to attend to honor Klaus Klomkau, that decision was made when he was not yet Speaker of the House. I think he already planned on attending that event. So he made that decision when he was in a partisan role, and then he maintained that decision to attend the event afterwards. Yes, but it was changed into an official trip, and other meetings were added to it. Was the trip organized by Mr. Fergus and his office? It was organized by the Office of International Affairs. Could you tell us what the Bureau's recommendations were with regard to that visit and when the recommendations were made? As mentioned, we will provide you with the program and see what the decisions were made in cooperation with that Bureau. Is it possible to get a copy of the correspondence that was exchanged between that Bureau and Mr. Fergus to see when the requests were made? In fact, we'd like to have all of the exchanges pertaining to the planning of that trip, since the trip was initiated by a member of Parliament, so someone who had a partisan role in the House. Yes, we will try to get all of his emails and all of the exchanges. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, just to make sure we're clear, since the beginning of Mr. Jansen's testimony this morning, there have been 4 requests made for the submission of documents. the briefing documents that were sent to the Speaker that were prepared by the Clerk's office, the agenda of the visit, and I've just added the email exchanges regarding the preparation of the Speaker's visit. I just want to make sure that those 4 things will be received by the committee. I want to ensure that the Clerk gets them. There's also the documentation pertaining the Yukon and PEI. And Mr. Lauzon asked for information regarding the incident pertaining to Mr. Scheer. Thank you. Is that the will of this committee to make sure that the clerk of the committee has everything that is required? Yes. And please do so today. Yes, as my colleague said, I had the same idea. We won't have all those documents in both languages. We'll have to get them translated. Well, since the House passed a motion whereby all resources of the House must be focused on this committee's work, I'm sure we can get those translations done very quickly. Thank you very much, Mr. Jansen, for all your effort to get this done. Thank you. We will do our best. You didn't say yes, you said you would do your best to provide all documents in both official languages today. Because, well, if we don't have them in both languages, we can't accept them. So your documents are the same ones that we use. So you agree with this? Okay, right, fine. So the documents that Mr. Berthold requested, everybody agrees that we ask for them? Yes. Mr. Julian also asked for documents pertaining to the Speaker in the House and apologies. Do we all agree with that in both official languages? Yes, after the video was video came to light. So yes, I would like to have all of those emails if possible. So everybody agrees? Oh, good. Everything's working. Fine, thank you. Now for the Liberals, we have Mr. Duguay, 3 minutes.
And his colleagues for all the good work they do for us every day. Madam Chair, I'd like to go back to a point my colleague, Monsieur Lauzon, raised, and this is regarding the incident where funds were transferred from Mr. Scheer's riding association to the Guelph candidate. There was some controversy surrounding this, Madam Speaker, and just to get a bit of a clarification, while that transfer happened during a time when Mr. Scheer was not Speaker, the answers coming back regarding that particular transaction, the answers came from the longtime Director of Communication in the Speaker's office, and I'm just wondering if Mr. Jantz could comment. Do you think it was appropriate for the Director of Communications in the Speaker's office to have responded, or should that have rightly come from somewhere like his constituency office?
Again, thanks for the question. I'm really not familiar at all with this case, so it's very, very difficult to comment on it. As we committed to do, we will search in our files to see what we can dig up in terms of any involvement we, the administration.
Chair, I would like a response to that in due course after you have had an opportunity to take a look at the record. And my understanding is that this issue was raised. I'm wondering if there was a reprimand to the Speaker's office, whether there were any consequences. I think it's relevant to the issue that we have before us. And Madam Chair, I would just have a minute. I think I'm the last questioner. So just given some of the context you've given us, that the Speaker is an MP, has come from a partisan background, is making a transition to a neutral officer of Parliament, do you have a crisp one or two recommendations that you would make to this committee?
Again, I think it's up to this committee to decide what it wants to include in its report in terms of recommendations. Certainly, I think a takeaway for us, the administration, is to beef up the section on impartiality and briefing material that we provide to the Speaker. Over and above that, again, it's really up to this committee to decide what it wants to contemplate in terms of recommendations. Myself personally, I would shy away from trying to codify everything a speaker can or cannot do, because the list would be very long and things are constantly changing. A few years ago there was no social media, now there is. To the point earlier, it makes things constantly evolving.
Excellent, thank you. And so the question that Mr. Duguid has asked, we will get him a response to. The will of the committee to get that response. Excellent. With that, I would like to thank you, Mr. Jantz. And while you're here, we're gonna give you a little bit of a gift, possibly. I would like to ask committee members if we recommend to the House to ratify the appointment of Eric Jantz to the position of Clerk of the House of Commons. Agreed? Agreed. We will be reporting that back on Thursday as well. With that, thank you for your time and attention. We look forward to receiving documents in both official languages. Congratulations. Thank you. Meeting suspended. We will be back in our seats in 2 minutes with the Speaker of the House. Thank you.
Apologize. I recorded a video for John Fraser, a longtime friend. Even though I had been told otherwise, it was broadcast at a partisan event. It was not to be used as such. Even if it was to be used in private or in public, I should have never recorded it. I know I made a mistake. I apologize fully. When I became Speaker, I talked about being like an arbiter. This is something that Canadians know very well. That is, ombudsmen or arbiters can make errors. But unlike an aftermatch situation, I made the wrong decision. I am here today to say that I will do better. I'm here I will set up a more rigorous protocol to make sure that that never happens again. I'm going to rely more on the House Administrative Services and the Clerk's office to look at such requests. I have spoken with speakers and parliamentary experts in Canada and in other parliaments, and will look for their advice. I said that the words and symbols count. When I applied for the speakership, I said that respect would be at the heart of my activities. Respect of people, respect of decorum, respect of the parliamentary institution. These values are very important to me still. But it is important to say that, like anyone who starts in a new position, I am working on the job and learning on the job. Let me give you a few details on the events that led us to here today. Like many of you, I have made some very long-lasting friendships with people from all walks of political life. The Bureau of Mr. Fraser asked me for something to mark his departure of the Ontario legislature. I decided to send what I thought was a private message of congratulations. I quickly recorded it between two meetings. In the video, I talked about the importance of his friendship and support for my wife and myself when we were starting to date, when we were newlyweds, and later when we became parents. That personal message was then broadcast during a public and partisan event. It should have never occurred. But more importantly, if I had not recorded that message, it would have never occurred. It would have not happened at all. It is entirely my fault. It was a hard-earned learned lesson, and I can assure you that it will never happen again. Before concluding, I would like you to know what I experienced as a young Black Canadian. I was someone who dreamt of being a member of Parliament one day, but didn't know if it was realistic. I had not seen many members of Parliament, much less speakers, who looked like me. Lionel called me up in Ontario. It was a young parent who recognized me, and he said that it was very important for him and for me to become speaker. He said that his daughter now wants to run for elected office when she is older. To Lionel and his daughter, and to all Black Canadians and racialized Canadians who are following this debate, I am really disappointed to have let you down. I can promise you that I will do better. In conclusion, know that Parliament and its traditions are very dear to me. I have a very strong attachment to this institution. I was page 35 years ago. I'm very pleased to be able to run the affairs of the House in a spirit of cooperation and respect. My first task every day is to fulfill my role in an impartial and respectful manner, because that is what Canadians of all origins and all political convictions can expect of the Speaker of the House.
To appear before you here, Madam Chair, let me continue with some remarks in English. First, let me apologize to all of you here, to all of our colleagues in the House, and indeed to all Canadians. I am sorry. I recorded a video message to John Fraser, a longtime friend. Despite assurances to the contrary, it was shown at a public partisan gathering. Most importantly, regardless of it being aired privately or publicly, I should never have recorded it. I apologize unreservedly. I know I messed up, and I won't do it again. When I assumed the Speaker's chair, I spoke about the role being like a referee. And I think one thing Canadians know well is that referees make mistakes. They are human. But unlike a referee after a game, I'm here to admit that, yeah, I blew that call. But I'm also telling you that I will do better. I'm putting in place a more rigorous communication protocol to make sure this never happens again. I will rely heavily on the services of the House administration under the leadership of the Clerk to review these kind of requests. I've also been reaching out to speakers and parliamentary experts in Canada and in other Westminster parliaments. My work will benefit from their advice and counsel. When I took on this role 2 months ago, I said words and symbols matter. I told you how respect would be at the heart of how I would take on this role. Respect for people, respect for decorum, respect for the institution of Parliament. These values continue to be important to me. But it's fair to say, like anyone taking on a new post, I'm learning on the job. Let me explain how this happened. Like so many of you, I've built deep and enduring friendships with people from all political backgrounds. A family member of Mr. Fraser phoned my office to request a personal video for a private surprise gathering to mark his departure from a leadership position in the Ontario legislature. I agreed to send what I believed would be a private message of congratulations and quickly recorded it between two meetings. On the video, I talked about what his friendship and his support meant to me and my wife as we were starting out as a couple, eventual newlyweds, and later new parents. This personal message was then shown at a partisan public gathering. This should not have happened. Most importantly, if I had never recorded the message in the first place, it would never have happened. That's on me. It's a hard lesson learned, a mistake that will not be repeated. Before I conclude, let me also share what it was like to be as a Black Canadian kid who loved Parliament and procedure. A kid who dreamed of becoming MP one day, but wasn't quite sure how realistic that was. I hadn't seen many MPs, let alone a speaker, who looked like me. Recently, I was stopped in Toronto by Lionel, a young Black Canadian father who recognized me. He told me how significant it was for him and his daughter to see me in this role. His daughter, he said, now wants to run for office when she grows up. To Lionel and his daughter, indeed, as well as to Black Canadians and racialized Canadians who are watching these proceedings, I am sorry I let you down. I will do better. In closing, let me be very clear. Parliament and its traditions are deeply important to me. I've been connected to this place since I was a teen, 35 years ago as a parliamentary page. I remain committed to presiding over the House of Commons fairly, thoughtfully, and collaboratively. Job one for me every day is to fulfill my role with impartiality and respect. Because that's what Canadians of all backgrounds and all political beliefs have a right to expect from the Speaker of the House of Commons. Madam Chair, I thank you and committee members for your time.
Thank you. We will now start with 6-minute rounds, starting with Mr. Scheer, suivi par Monsieur Lauzon, puis Madame de Bellefeuille, and then Mr. Julian. It will be 6 minutes through the chair. Honorable members, Mr. Scheer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Fergus, everyone comes to the House of Commons having some involvement in partisan activities. We get elected through party nominations and in general elections by running under a party banner. Some of us have a greater degree of partisan activities in our background than others, and I just want to quickly go through your background in terms of your partisan involvement. You held a couple of senior executive level type of positions within the Liberal Party itself. Is that correct?
I held a senior position. I was the National Director of the Liberal Party of Canada at one point, yes.
Okay, which years would that be?
2007 to 2010.
2010, okay, so relatively recently. And before that, you were president of the was it the Liberal Youth Wing, or?
That is correct.
Okay. And then before that, you were you ever involved at the staff level for members of Parliament or for cabinet ministers?
I had worked in opposition for a federal member of Parliament in the constituency office, and I'd also worked from 1996 to 2000. I'm sorry, it might be 2001 for a federal cabinet minister.
Okay, Liberal cabinet ministers?
Yes.
Okay. And then upon becoming elected, the path that you chose is a little bit different than other members who are seeking to become chair occupants. Normally, someone might try to shed some of that partisanship in the recent past in order to establish the credentials or the impression of being a less partisan or a non-partisan member of Parliament to present as a candidate for Speaker, having in order to assure members of other parties that you could in fact be nonpartisan. So, for example, in my case, I was Assistant Deputy Speaker, then Deputy Speaker. Other speakers who have been elected to hold that role have spent time as committee chairs, often in roles that are less partisan than what goes on in the House. But upon your election in 2015, were you immediately nominated as a parliamentary secretary right after 2015, or was there some?
Through you, Madam Chair, aside from your case and perhaps Mr. Roda's case, actually, I think most speakers who were elected into the role, as going back to as far as Mr. Fraser, had a similar path that I had, that in the sense that they hadn't been an assistant speaker or a deputy speaker before they assumed the role.
Right, but there are other ways to establish nonpartisan credentials, such as committee chairmanships, or at least taking a bit of a step back from the cut and thrust of the hyper-partisan roles that exist in the chamber. And I'm just pointing out that you did hold one of those positions. You were parliamentary secretary right after the 2015 election.
I was parliamentary secretary through you, Madam Chair. Sorry. I was parliamentary secretary when I was nominated parliamentary secretary after getting elected for the first time in 2015. I then I was a member of the committee of not a parliamentary secretary, but a member of the finance committee for 2 years. And then just before the 2019 election, I was reappointed parliamentary secretary.
Parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister.
At that time, it wasn't parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister. It was parliamentary secretary to the Minister for the President of the Treasury Board and the Minister responsible for digital government.
Okay. But you were parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister for how long?
I believe it was from 2020 to this autumn.
Okay. So you say that a family friend of Mr. Fraser contacted you. So it wasn't Mr. Fraser himself, it was a member of his family?
No, it wasn't Mr. Fraser itself. It was a member of his family who had contacted my office. It wasn't Mr. Fraser because it was supposed to be a surprise video at a private event.
And do you have any copies of correspondence that you could provide to the committee?
I'm more than happy to provide this committee with all correspondence, a phone record of the request that came into the office.
You mentioned in your opening remarks that you referenced your own comments about being an arbiter in the chamber. Just asking you to ask yourself, if you were involved in a situation that needed an arbitrator, and you saw the arbitrator at an event with the person on the other side of the table, maybe if we imagine a union negotiation with management or some type of dispute between two parties, and you saw the arbitrator, the person whose hands your case was in, at an event with your opposing counsel or with the opposing partner in that situation, would you want that arbitrator to continue to hear your case and to make that decision after seeing he or she in their full arbitrator's uniform, or at least with clear signals that that's who that person was at that time, saying nice things or being involved in any way with the person on the other side of the table? Would you want that person to hear your case?
Madam Chair, am I permitted to respond?
Sure.
So, Madam Chair, if I could, I thank the honourable member for that question. This has been something that actually has been a bit of an aha moment for me. Madam Chair, I thought speaking about the aha moment came in discussion with a member of the opposition when I realized that by talking about my past, I thought it was a value-free statement, just recounting the things that I did, such as the questions that Mr. Scheer just asked me. But the aha moment came when saying that people don't see that when I talk about my past, it's not a value-free statement. They see it as a way as almost making a statement today about my political partiality. And that was not my intention. I thought I was just talking about the posts and the roles that I held in the past and the context in which things were made. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Monsieur Lauzon, 6 minutes.
Mr. Lauzon, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Honourable Greg Fergus, for appearing today. I would like you to talk about your role and the very steep learning curve that you have to follow. It must have been difficult for you to just be parachuted there. We know that you had some experience and knowledge of the House rules and so forth. But tell us about this learning curve. You have to set up your own team. You have all of the clerks with whom you work directly. I imagine you have all sorts of demands placed on you from left and right. And on top of that, you made a video. Can you tell us a little bit about that learning curve? That is absolutely huge. So you were only there for 2 months, really. Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Lauzon. And through you, Madam Chair, I will tell you it was absolutely mind-boggling. We went from being elected to occupying the speakership. At the time, I asked myself the same question. Would I possibly be able to take a week to get all the briefing sessions and some information before actually becoming speaker? Can't I have a little break? But no, it was 3 days. Everything was going so quickly. You are entirely correct. By proceeding that way, I had to set up a team. Fortunately, I had people from the previous speaker's team who stayed. There are some people who left. Unfortunately, I had to set up my team and attend all of these briefing sessions to understand all of the aspects of the role. The Speaker is not only the person who presides over the House proceedings, but that individual is also a diplomat, fifth in order of precedence in Canada, and also an administrator. The House of Commons has 2,800 employees, starting from our interpreters, going to those who organize meetings, security, transportation, and the culinary staff. It's a huge learning curve. Thank you very much, Mr. Fergus. We know that humans aren't perfect. We all make errors. Someone who doesn't dare do anything won't make a mistake. You did do something and you have apologized publicly, and I thank you for that. I would also like to give you the opportunity to talk about the new procedure. In your remarks, you said that there's going to be a new process put in place. I would like to tell you a little bit about how we can improve communications in the future to ensure that we can remedy a situation such as this one. So you have at least a minute to tell us how that process is going to be implemented. Indeed, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Lauzon, for that question. Indeed, prior to the evolution of this situation, we were preparing a process to ensure that all considerations of any invitations would at some point be subjected to an evaluation grid. We would be able to determine whether it's something we should attend. Is it something that is going to go against the expectations that one has of a speaker? It's an evaluation grid that we are going to submit to the clerk's office so that we can get their approval or not. Because the clerk's office has a great deal of experience to determine what should happen based on what happened in the past. And in that regard, every communication that we have will be very transparent, and everyone will know whether it's approved or not. So we know that in the past you had a very political career, you were very involved in your community, various organizations. Now, are you going to be able to rely on your past experience and what's happening now and be able to set aside what has just happened to continue to fulfill your mandate as Speaker? Yes, I think that all of the decisions that I have made so far are proof of my impartiality. But where I have to make more effort is when it comes to participating in activities outside of the House of Commons. I certainly have a lot of common sense in many areas, but I never believed before this incident that by talking of my past, my political past, that is as political as all of the members who are sitting here today, we all have a political past within our own political party. Mr. Fergus, this is important. Could you provide us with that grid so that we can add it to our file? Even if it's not quite finished, we could use that so that we can analyze everything within the context of this report. Thank you very much. Yes, I'd be pleased to do so, Madam Chair, but I must stress that it is still just a draft. Thank you, Ms. Bellefeuille. You have 6 minutes. Mr. Fergus, thank you very much for appearing today. Last week, you recognized how honest a person I am at a meeting of the Board of Internal Economy, and this morning I will be as honest and sincere. We have had discussions in the past. You had just been elected, and I said, Mr. Fergus, you are under high surveillance because it is a huge challenge to go from being a partisan member of Parliament to being Speaker. I said, you under closest scrutiny, and I said, I hope you're going to convince me that you can live up to that, because having good judgment and impartiality are the two major qualities that we expect of a Speaker. I apologize to my Liberal colleagues, but judgment is something you have or you don't. You can't learn it. I'm sure you heard what Mr. Jones said before this committee, who said in English and in French, he said that you did not consult your right-hand man when it came to recording that video. You did that alone in your office. So I would say that you recorded a video using House resources. That is not allowed. You have to be beyond a shadow of a doubt. You recorded that in your robes. You presented yourself as Speaker. You did it in your chambers. The head of the Bloc Québécois had spoken, and you said that his question at the time was out of order, and you said you ruled it out of order, and then you went to Washington. I can't understand that. You went to Washington when the House was sitting, and at a time when your situation was creating a confidence crisis in the House. So that's a second faux pas. Because when you're aware of having made a mistake, you have to stay with the ship and listen to what is going on in the House. The House that had withdrawn its confidence through emotion. And through your participation in Washington, when you were there, you talked about your partisan role. You are still partisan, and you were not able to set that aside to really assume this new role of Speaker. I can understand that it was a speaker for you, a challenge for you. So I would like to know, why didn't you consult your close entourage? Why did you not consult your clerk? Why didn't you consult them to say, well, you know, am I doing the right thing doing this, wearing my speaker's robe and in the speaker's chamber and speaking and identifying myself as a speaker? Thank you very much for that question, Ms. de Bellefeuille. And through you, Madam Chair, I remember that discussion. As I explained, I think I answered one of the questions here today. I said that the moment I understood the gravity of my situation when I was talking of my past, it may have given the impression that I was validating my political views, and that's where I learned my lessons. You're talking about Washington, but now I'm talking about your video. So I can imagine this. It was your chief of cabinet who was filming you? No, it was my assistant, my office assistant here on the Hill. And Madame de Bellefeuille, through you, Madam Chair, as I explained, it's not her fault, it's my fault. I fully admit that it was a lack of judgment on my part, and that is why I apologize. This is a hard-learned lesson that will not be repeated. Just to understand the context here, I filmed that video believing that it was a private video. I'm interrupting you here, Mr. Fergus. I don't have much time and I have a lot to say. I understand your intention, but that's where the lack of judgment lies. How can you imagine that filming a video for a friend who is leaving political life, they're dressed in your robes, in your chambers. How could you have imagined? And if I had been chief of your staff, I would have said, you can't do that. Imagine if it leaks. Imagine if somebody finds it. You have to remain impartial. You have to be above reproach. You're getting this filmed by your assistant. You don't consult Mr. Jans. You don't consult your head of staff, your chief of cabinet. So that's a lack of judgment. You are saying it's not going to recur. But what concerns me is that when it is something that is even more complex where good judgment is required, well, that's very risky, because for me, this was something that was very easy to judge. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would like to thank Ms. Bellefeuille for that. I think it is important to have a protocol in place, clear procedures to follow for this type of request. That is one way to have a little distance and to make sure that we don't participate in something that could lead to trouble. Mr. Julian.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je me sens attristé.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This week, there was a crisis surrounding the speakership. It was difficult for everyone. It was difficult for Canadians. And now I feel that we are grappling with something serious pertaining to the speakership, and we all have to reflect seriously about this, because the role of speaker is critical.
In this situation, I'm saddened that the House felt compelled to refer, and they referred this to the PROC committee unanimously because of what they consider to be a serious error. I've been listening very carefully to your testimony, Mr. Fergus, and I wanted to know when you realized that this was a serious error. When did you know that it was wrong to have done that video?
The very moment I saw that it was, or that it was reported to me that it had been aired publicly, it all of a sudden, Mr. Julian, it became very clear that that was just wrong. That wasn't the intention. It shouldn't have. Not only wasn't the intention, but as I said in my testimony, as I say to you again, it should never have been taped in the first place. It became very clear in hindsight how wrong that was. And that's the reason why I apologize to you, and I apologize to all members, and I'm apologizing to all Canadians.
But when you were doing the video in your robes, in the House, in your speaker's chambers, what was going through your mind? And I say this with respect. I know as a member of Parliament that I can't film partisan videos in my constituency office, in my Hill office. We take careful attention to do that. The precedence is vast. We all know that it is wrong. I don't understand what was going through your mind as you were taping it. And did you consult with your chief of staff at any point to say, do you think this is a good idea?
The difficulty, through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Julian, that was the problem, is that it was a very quick, let's just quickly get this done. And it was not a partisan video, it was a very personal video. I did talk about my past, but it wasn't one where I was pronouncing about the present or making a declaration on that front. It was a mistake. I shouldn't have done it, period. But when I was making it, it was in the moment, it was between two meetings, we were in a rush, and I just did it in one take and moved on to my next meeting. And I've been playing over this moment in my mind over and over again. I wish I had just taken a moment to think about it. Sometimes in politics, and I think we all do this, but it's a glaring when it happens to you, and it's embarrassing as all out, is that sometimes when you do these things, you're not thinking. We move from pillar to post so quickly. We go from one event to another to another. We don't take the time sometimes to just take a step back and think about it. That's why a protocol is being put in place to make sure that all communications will be going through a process that will be using the administration of the House, especially the clerk, to determine whether something is appropriate or not.
I'm troubled by something else as well. In your apology to the House on Monday, December 4th, you said, video was played at a convention for a party that I am not a member of in a province where I do not live in and where I've been unable to vote for nearly 3 decades. But on the Saturday, 48 hours before, the Globe and Mail quoted you as saying, in terms of Mr. Fraser, he demonstrated so much calm and conviction and resolve and determination, and he's held it all together at a very challenging time in the history of our party. You referred to our party in the Globe and Mail on Saturday. You said on Monday that I'm not a member of this party. It's in a province I do not live in, where I've been unable to vote for nearly 3 decades. Do you see the contradiction between those two statements?
I do, and if you had asked me if I hadn't taken a look at the transcript of the video, I wouldn't have. I certainly wouldn't have used that word as our party. What I was referring to in terms of his past, my past, and where it really connected was 30 years ago.
J'ai une autre contradiction. Vous venez de dire que...
I have another question for you, and I can understand that these were very intense weeks when you were appointed Speaker. It was a period of adaptation. But according to what Mr. Jans said, a few days after you were elected, you started planning a trip to Washington while Parliament was sitting. I see a contradiction there. It was very intense at the end of the session. But you were planning a trip to Washington during the parliamentary session? Could you explain that contradiction? Yes. It was a personal commitment I had made to attend that event. I was intending to do that as a member of Parliament on a personal basis. And when I explained that to the team, that I wouldn't be available, and that I had taken steps with the occupants of the chair to replace me during that period. I don't know who had suggested it first, but someone suggested that they could maybe organize some other meetings at the same time. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We're going to go into our second round. It'll be Mr. Cooper, followed by Mr. Gerritsen, puis Madame de Belfiore, and Mr. Julian. Mr. Cooper, 5 minutes to you through the chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Fergus, you stated that you realized that it was a mistake when it had been aired publicly, and that if only you had a moment to reflect on it, you wouldn't have done that. You stated that as though the video were done in isolation, except that it wasn't done in isolation, because on the evening of December 1st, the day before the Liberal leadership announcement, an interview in the Globe and Mail, written by Laura Stone, was published, in which you praised Mr. Fraser and offered partisan comments. Did you think that that interview was going to be in private?
No, not at all. Through you, Madam Chair, I was being interviewed, and I made it again clear during that interview that it wasn't talking about his current place. I was talking about, matter of fact, if we can get the transcripts of it from Ms. Stone, I said very clearly that I can't talk about political current affairs, but I could certainly talk about the man that I knew.
You made comments, including referring to the Liberal Party as our party. Those were your words. You thought it was appropriate to take an interview with Laura Stone in your capacity as Speaker of the House to speak about a sitting MPP who is the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, or was, on the eve of a convention. You thought that that was appropriate as Speaker of the House of Commons.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Cooper, I had an interview with Ms. Stone to talk about the person who I knew, the person who had an interaction with, and I made it very clear during the interview that it's not to talk about current politics. I couldn't do that as Speaker.
Well, you did refer to the Liberal Party as our party, and I would submit, Mr. Fergus, with the greatest respect, the fact that you didn't see an issue with that demonstrates or raises questions about your judgment. Now, I do want to drill down on your statement around the video and how that came about. You said that you were approached by a family member of Mr. Fraser. Who was that family member?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to provide all the information on this.
A simple question. Who was the family member?
Madam Chair, I've been a member of PROC, and I know that we've been very careful about revealing the names of family members. I'm happy to provide that information, and I will, to the Clerk of PROC. But
when was the request made?
May I ask that the committee speak to Mr. Fraser and ask him if it's okay for him to reveal the name of the family member?
Well,
So I think I'm pausing the time for a second. I think what Mr. Cooper has done is move on, because we do know that you're undertaking to bring those documents. I will confirm that all members want those documents at the end of your appearance. We still have lots of time with you. But what I hear from Mr. Cooper is that he has moved on, asking when the request was made. So I feel Mr. Cooper hears what you're saying. I think he has the same regard. So the floor is back yours, Mr. Cooper.
when was the request made?
The request was made on November 27.
November 27?
That is correct.
Okay. And in your statement to the House on December 4th, you stated that you were asked to record a video to be played at an intimate gathering. What was that intimate gathering?
It was to be through you, Madam Chair, it was to be a surprise goodbye with members of Mr. Fraser's team to be played on December 1st.
To be played at December 1st. And who was Mr. Fraser's team?
I don't know, but I'm assuming it was close folks who had been...
I presume you're talking about his political team? Would that be Mr. Fraser's team?
I'm assuming it would comprise part of his political team, but it certainly could be other friends and family and gathering.
And the event was to be held on December 1st. Where was the event? What location?
I do not know.
So you had no idea? But you knew it was going to be played for Mr. Fraser's team. The number of people there you weren't sure of. And as you indicated, part of that would have been his political team. So, Mr. Fergus, that again raises serious questions about your judgment. And when did you find out that it was played at the Ontario leadership announcement? What time before then were you alerted that it would be played?
I wasn't alerted at all that it would be played. Indeed, I had received assurances that it wouldn't be played publicly.
From who?
From the family member.
From the family member. And so you mean to tell me you found out at the same time the public found out?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is absolutely correct.
And you had indicated that a staff member recorded the video in your office. Who was a staff member who recorded the video?
Okay.
I've asked a simple question.
You have asked a simple question. I'm taking by the response and the beep, beep, beep that we're not getting that answer, but it sounds...
No, I'd be happy to provide that answer. I'm a little uncomfortable on again, it's a tradition of this committee and of this House is that the Member of Parliament is responsible for the actions of his or her staff. I could tell her that it was a staff member.
Excellent.
And it was
So
my
I'm
staff
going to
member from my home office.
minimize, so I think that's kind of where I was getting to, but it does sound like you're agreeing to provide the documents. Once again, we will get committee to confirm that we would like those documents at a later time. So thank you for that exchange. Mr. Garrettson, 5 minutes through the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Fergus, for providing your comments today. You have stated that you were given the assurances that the video would not be used in a public forum. That's correct. And that
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct.
And you were under the understanding that it would be played amongst intimate individuals within Mr. Fraser's group or team.
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct.
You stated in your comments, your introductory comments, and I think it's something that no question has really picked up on yet, but you stated that you've been friends with Mr. Fraser for a long time. How long approximately?
I can tell you since 1989.
Since 1989. You said that Mr. Fraser supported you quite a bit over the years, and I think you even, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was in part of the translated part from French, but you had said that he was very supportive of you when you were getting together with your wife. Did I hear that correctly?
Indeed. Mr. Fraser, my wife and I had started going out that summer. Mr. Fraser was a key person. He and his wife were slightly older. They had some young children. They were role models for us. And Mr. Garrettson, to prove that, or one of the reasons why I'd say that I had no intention of this video being played publicly is because for the last about 4 or 5 years, I rarely mention my wife's name. I don't mention my kids' names in public videos because of the climate in which we're in. In this video, I did mention my wife's name. He was.
So he was I heard you say he was a role model to you.
More than that, Mr. Garrettson, you might not know this, or members might not know this. I'm a practicing Roman Catholic. I wasn't born Catholic. To marry my wife, I had to become Catholic. Mr. Fraser and his wife were part of the adult ritual for becoming Catholic, Roman Catholic initiation for athletes.
My wife went through the exact same thing.
They were key parts of that. That's that kind of role that he played in such an important part of my life.
So it's fair to say that your relationship with Mr. Fraser goes well beyond partisan activities or the Liberal Party of Canada, the Liberal Party of Ontario, the Liberal Party, quote unquote, generally speaking.
It's a personal relationship.
It's a very personal relationship, and throughout the 3 or 4 decades that you've known him, your engagement with him. Can you talk about the manner in which you've engaged with him outside of political or partisan activities, whether at convention or campaigning or whatnot?
Well, since I've been elected, I don't think I've participated in. Matter of fact, I know I have not participated in his campaigns. I'm busy schedule being a member of Parliament on my side in my province. We've, in the intervening years since 1989, I've babysat his kids. He's babysat mine. I've been to his cottage. We've had just a friendship long before he got into politics.
So before Mr. Fraser was even in politics, you had a well-established relationship with him. Did I hear you correctly that you babysat his children, he's babysat your children? You have spent a lot of time together personally outside of politics, and you have an extremely close friendship with Mr. Fraser.
Extremely close friendship. We haven't spoken as much in recent years, but when we do see each other
And you said earlier that you considered him a role model.
Very much so.
So when somebody approached you and said, this is a role model, somebody you looked up to, somebody that you aspired to be, that's correct?
That is correct.
That's correct. So when somebody reaches out to you, in particular a family member, and asks you to provide a video to your role model about thanking him for his service, and you were under the impression or giving the assurances that it wouldn't be used public, is it fair to say that it seemed like at the time, in the moment, that it made complete sense to do that?
Well, yes, it did in terms of the context. But I also need to say, Mr. Gerritsen, and through you, Madam Chair, is that I did make mistakes. I should not have recorded that message in my speaker's robes, certainly not in the speaker's chambers, and frankly, in reflection upon how this could be seen as affecting my partisanship, I shouldn't have recorded the video at all.
And just finally, I heard you saying earlier, I think it was in response to a question, that you filmed the video between two meetings?
It was a rushed deal. The assistant said...
So you were in your speaker's robes, you were at a meeting, you were on your way to another meeting.
That is correct.
You said, I need to film this video for my role model. That's not what you're saying, I'm paraphrasing. You go into your office, the video is filmed in one take, it's done, you think that's the end of it, you think it's going to a very private audience to thank your role model, and then you leave and depart to go to your next meeting.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We will now go Madame de Bellefeuille.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You said to Mr. Julian that this was done very quickly between two meetings. You didn't really think twice about it. And I understand that your staff also didn't really think twice about it. You haven't consulted anybody because you didn't have the presence of the mind to understand that this is something that you shouldn't have done. You understand that how I see the role of chair is that you have to set the example. You will have to make quick decisions as the chair. You will be put in very stressful situations. And so, in my perspective, this does not bode well. It's your work to make decisions on the fly, as we say. And it will be done in stressful situations. I would like you to tell me how you can explain that it took you one whole week to apologize for this serious mistake. It took you 1 week before you were able to think about it, reflect upon it, and accept that you made a serious mistake that undermined the confidence of the House in you. Madam Chair, I think that I apologized right away. Right away, I said this was a mistake, and I apologized to anybody who I talked to. This is something that I should never have done. And I repeatedly said that I apologized. Well, you said that it shouldn't have been interpreted like this. It is very different from the apologies that you made this morning. You said that you made a mistake, that you should never have done that. But in the House, we haven't heard that yet. this morning's apology is a 100% owning up to the actions that you undertook, but it's very different from what we heard in the House. It's like you just understood the gravity of what just transpired. Okay. Madam Chair, the first occasion that I had to rise, I apologized to the House for my actions. Okay, thank you. Mr. Julian.
This is saddening for Canadians. And I need to understand, both having gone through what we consider it to be a campaign for speakership. We have speakers who offer themselves. They all talk about the role of the speaker. They talk about impartiality and nonpartisanship. I'm interested in your perception of impartiality and nonpartisanship prior to your election, and what you did following that to ensure a full understanding of impartiality and nonpartisanship in terms of precedents. I was disturbed by Mr. Jantz's testimony that he had not been consulted in any way about the filming of the video. And so I need to know, and I think Canadians need to know, what are the steps that you took after your election to ensure that the comments you'd made that were very strong about impartiality and nonpartisanship were kept moving forward?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much to Mr. Julian for this question. Every action or ruling that I've made, whether it was even from the chair or if it was reflective in writing that was taken in the House, was one that was, they were all based on consultation with our clerk's team to making sure that they were neutral, that they were impartial, and that were in the best traditions of the House. Quite often you have seen me stand up at question period and even consult the table to making sure that the decisions that I had were rendered impartial, and that they were a reflection of the best of our parliamentary traditions. That was always done. Every decision that I made was in that regard.
I don't understand why you didn't consult the clerk and the legal team that we have for the House of Commons around the video. Why did you not do that?
And that is a mistake that is clearly on my fault. I saw this at the time, and it has taken me to understand how this does not do well. But I take it at the time that I was making a video, a tribute video to somebody who was leaving a post, someone who had a deep relationship with the past. I'm sorry that I made that video. I acknowledge it's a mistake. And that is why I've set up processes to make sure that that can't happen again.
Thank you. So we're going to finish the second round at 5 minutes, Monsieur Berthold, suivi par 5 minutes à Madame Romanando. Et puis, on va commencer une ronde de 6 minutes encore, OK? Mr. Berthold, 5 minutes.
Merci. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Fergus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fergus. We are here to talk about judgment today. I think that in the House we already recognize, and I will cite the unanimous motion, that the public participation of a chair to a liberal event is against the tradition of the House, and it is a serious error of judgment that undermines the confidence that is necessary to exercise this role. And this was adopted unanimously by all members. How can you not accept this verdict, Mr. Fergus, of the 338 members of this House? Thank you very much for this question. I appreciate and I recognize that I had a lack of judgment in filming this video, and this is why I am here to apologize before you and to tell you about the steps that we'll undertake to make sure that this never happens again. Yes, but I would like to talk about the events. I would like to talk about the past. Is this the first time that your judgment has been questionable? I am not able to respond to this, Madam President, but I can tell you that I've always said that I am somebody who tries their best at all times, and I think that I've been quite good so far in terms of judgment. But when I have a lapse of judgment, I am quick to recognize my mistakes and I apologize and I make sure that this kind of thing does not happen again. The problem, Mr. Fergus, is that you acknowledge things, but still you do this again. On February 14, 2023, you said that you were going to make sure that your obligations, according to the law, are always respected. I did not do right by my duty of parliamentary secretary, and this was February 14th of this year, and here we are once again talking about your judgment. The members, the presidents must why do the members have to ask you for apologies, Mr. Chair? We must question your ability to make decisions that are on par with good judgment. If you had the good judgment of consulting your clerk, who would have told you not to film this video, or perhaps not to wear the president's robes, or to talk about your liberal past at an event in Washington? Given that you've already been through this kind of process, you are now doing it again. Mr. Fergus, you seek to be an arbiter as the chair, and it is very difficult to accept that you think that apologies will now be sufficient to really get over this incident.
Thank you very much. That is not the situation here. You have to actually act. When the ethics advisor talked about that letter that I'd written for a group of people that had nothing to do with me, I set up a process whereby every letter that left my office to ask for a service from a department or to ask for something from immigration, that it go through the Essex Bureau. We're talking about the current situation. Well, I wanted to raise that because you did. I just wanted to say that steps have been taken. But why is it that it's always after proof of a lack of judgment that you apologize? Well, it's very important because when there has been a lapse of judgment, you have to apologize. If you do things well, no apologies are required. The reason we are here today is because some of the decisions that I made showed a bit of a lack of judgment. And so here I am. I admit having made a mistake. I apologize for it. I took the steps to make sure that this never happens again. Thank you. Ms. Romanado, 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And through you, I would like to thank the Speaker for appearing before us today.
Mr. Fergus, you mentioned your office received a call from a family member of Mr. Fraser Monday, November 27th, asking for a private video, an homage to a friend that would be played in a private setting on Friday, December 1st. So we're talking Monday to Friday of that week. It's a 105-second video that was shot at some point during the week. Do you recall what day you filmed that
It was shot on the day that I was made aware of the request. It was on Thursday, I believe that is the 30th of November.
Okay. So, as you know, Mr. Speaker, when we do professional videos, whether it be the CPAC video or so on, we go to a studio, we have our little name on the bottom. That's an official video that we do, that we have time to prepare a speech and so on. So based on this, the request came in. You literally had between two meetings. It's pretty obvious that because of the quality of the video, you had a staffer do it. You were between meetings. You had your robe on, did the video, went on to the next meeting. While you acknowledge, and we all acknowledge, that it was improper use of your role as speaker to film that video, it's clear there was no intent here to create an official speaker video for this occasion. Is that correct?
More than that, you are correct. There was no intent to create an official speaker video. There was no intent to make a video that would have been aired publicly, and certainly there was no intent for a video to be played at a convention, a political convention. That was a complete surprise to me. But the error still is mine. The error still is mine. I should not have recorded that video in the first place.
And with that, Mr. Fergus, before you even were asked to come to PROC, you've mentioned that you've put in protocols to make sure that any requests for, whether it be letters of support, whether it be videos, whether it be something in your capacity as Speaker or a Member of Parliament, that you've put protocols into your office that going forward, the grill, la grille for decision making will assist you to ensure that yourself, but all the further speakers would not make the same the same mistake. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay. Now, with respect to normally when a speaker is elected, we all know that normally what would happen is there'd be an election. After the House is dissolved, people would be campaigning to be a speaker, so on and so forth. After a general election, the first order of business is to elect a speaker. In your case, it literally was because of the resignation of a former speaker. So normally there would have been more of a kind of a cooling off period, I'd like to refer to it as, in terms of, you had time to campaign to be a speaker and so on and so forth. In your case, that was not the case. In terms of recommendations, we heard from the clerk this morning about perhaps beefing up some of the briefings and recommendations, and to train new speakers the do's and don'ts of being a speaker. Is there any recommendation you would also put forward, given this lessons learned, that you think we should also recommend to the House?
I think that's the clerk had brought up an excellent suggestion to beef up the aspects on the briefing and the briefing binder that is provided to the speaker, and to making sure that protocols are put in place so that any outside communication from the speaker would run through this system. This is what we're putting in place right now.
Perfect. And Mr. Speaker, you're probably not aware of that, but late last night, many members of PROC received letters supporting you in your role as Speaker. In fact, I believe at 10 a.m. this morning, the West Island Black Community Association was holding a press conference in Quebec supporting you and acknowledging you made a mistake. And I don't know about you, but I think every single one of us in this room has made a mistake in their life. It's what we do with it. We apologize, we learn from it, we move on. And I wanted to personally convey to you that you have people supporting you that have written to all of us to say that you're new. We all make mistakes. It's time to acknowledge we made a mistake. You've apologized for that mistake. We're going to put remedies in place. But I want to thank you and let you know that there is support out there for the role model you are playing for young Black Canadians. And I wanted to thank you for that.
Madam Chair, through you, I'd like to thank Ms. Romanado, and I was not aware of that letter, and I'm very grateful for that. And I hope that all Canadians can understand that if you do make an error, and then if you can show some contrition, and if you could have a real view, soul-searching view, put in place processes to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Okay.
That you can still make big mistakes and you can still have an opportunity to move on.
We We'll now go into our third round, which will be a 6-minute round. Okay? Donc, on va avoir 6 minutes à Mr. Scheer, suivi par Mr.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Point of order, Mr. Duncan.
Wondering, just in reference to Ms. Romanato's comments about, she referenced some emails that we received last night, including the members of PROC's personal parliamentary emails. I'm looking for unanimous consent if I could table those 2 letters that were provided to us by email last night, and also including in that a copy of the metadata from both of those. When you open up the Microsoft Word document, you can actually go and see who the original authors of those 2 were. I'd like to table not only the letters, but along with each, that the author of the one letter dated yesterday came from a Liberal appointed senator, Senator Andrew Cardozo. And I'd also in the second letter like to table not only the letter, but the metadata that shows that the author of that original letter was a former Liberal Member of Parliament, Frank Baylis. I'd ask for unanimous consent that those full documents be tabled with the committee, please.
I don't think there's any concerns. I will be going through documents at the end, but just to remedy this, are we fine with that? We welcome them to the digital binder. With that, I will be going into a 6-minute round of Mr. Scheer, followed by Mr. Duguid, puis Madame de Bellefeuille, suivi par Mr. Julian. Mr. Scheer, 6 minutes.
Point of order, Madam Chair, just before you start my timer, is it possible for me to share my time with Mr. Calkins?
You can pass the floor as you please, as long as you stay within your 6 minutes.
Okay, could you give me a 3-minute warning then, and then I'll...
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You want me to?
Is that okay?
Anything you'd like. We welcome you here anytime, Mr. Scheer.
You can say no.
Okay, so this is going to start your time because I want to maximize our time. Okay. Excellent. 6 minutes to you. I'll tell you at 3 minutes. Mr. Scheer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's really important for Canadians to understand why this is such a big deal. You have come from a very, very partisan past, what some might describe as a hyper-partisan role, given the fact that you have served in executive-level positions. I think you said national, was it director of the Liberal Party, president of the Youth Wing. You were parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister right up until the beginning of this fall session. Those are roles in which you are very close with the government, very close with the Prime Minister himself. And then to transition into becoming Speaker, to running for Speaker, members of Parliament have to kind of, once you won, we have to park that history of yours and trust that you're going to be nonpartisan and objective. The fundamental rule of being Speaker is also one of the easier rules to follow. And that is, you just don't do partisan things. You don't participate in partisan events. You don't say things publicly, or certainly not in a capacity wearing Speaker's robes or in his office that would have any connection to partisan activities or partisanship or indicating partisan favor. You did the interview with the Globe and Mail where you praised a sitting Liberal politician who, as far as we all know, is planning. He's currently an MPP. He's given every indication he's going to run again as a Liberal in Ontario. So it's not like it was a retirement party or he's going off to do something else. He's going to continue being an active partisan player in Ontario politics. You referred to the Ontario Party as our party. So all of this comes to light. In addition to this, we understand that your chief of staff, which I understand your hesitance to name certain people at committee, but he is listed on a public website, the Government Employee Directory Service, and that is Tommy Defas. I understand that he was very close with the current Prime Minister, Prime Minister Trudeau. He was his executive assistant at one point, and now he's your chief of staff. So having that hyper-partisan role in your very recent past, hiring someone very quickly out of the PMO with a very close relationship, personal relationship with the Prime Minister, and now this comes to light. So I again ask you, you talked about the arbitrator and you didn't quite address the nature of my question. If you're a hockey player and you're about to play a game and you just saw the referee in his uniform giving a pep talk to the locker room of an opposing team, it wouldn't matter what the context was, would it? You wouldn't want that official refereeing your game. If you were involved in some kind of dispute that needed an arbitrator and you saw that judge in his robes at an event with opposing counsel, it wouldn't matter what the context was. You can't unsee that. You've now acknowledged there was a grave error of judgment. as many colleagues have mentioned, you are trusted to make on-the-spot decisions without time to run things through filters or decision-making trees. And we have to trust that that's coming from a nonpartisan and objective place. And I would suggest the fact that you didn't see that shows that you're still too close to the partisanship of it. You're too close with these partisan players that you don't see that for members of other parties, it would be a problem. So again, would just ask you, would you want to hear your case adjudicated? Would you want to play in a sports game, having seen the referee or having seen the judge or arbitrator involved in that type of display with an adversary or with an opponent? Would you trust that process having seen that?
Madam Chair, through you, I think it's really important, and I thank the honourable member for his intervention, the person who has sat in this role before. To go back to the ref analogy, quite frankly, it was a different league in which we were involved. A, but B, I also recognize that the member is right, that talking about my past, although when in that reference to the notion of our party, that was when I was actually a resident of Ontario back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, up until 1994. That was at that time that it was referred to that. Now, I do not like talking, I don't want to talk about my past here, because every time I do, I know that it sounds like I'm being partisan. It was a matter of record that at that time we were both members of the same party. It's just, it is a fact that I'm not validating that today. So I just want to make sure about that. Second thing, you'd raised the issue of my chief of staff. As you know, being speaker, that you are administrating a large organization here. My chief of staff left Parliament Hill in early 2018, almost 6 years that he's been occupying a senior management role in the private sector. He is someone who can help manage this, but more importantly, someone who also has political experience, who understands what it is to be a third political party, to be in official opposition, and in government. So someone who has an ability to really hear and respond to the needs which are brought up by all folks. So that's the reason why this person was hired. He's calm, he's collected, and has a great reputation on the Hill.
Thank you. I do just want to put on the record that I apologize after you asked me to give you a 3-minute warning. I was so invigorated by the exchange that I lost track of time. And I also went to go get bacon. So I do apologize for not having my priorities in order. Mr. Calkins will make sure you do have time on the next round. Mr. Duguid, 6 minutes to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
That was the entire, sorry, point number, that was the entire 6 minutes?
Can you?
We had to sit through it. We can confirm that.
Mr. Okay, just staying focused. Mr. Duguid, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the Speaker for his forthrightness today, for admitting your mistake, and for apologizing. I think I certainly accept your apology, and also for referencing that this is a position you've been thrust into quite recently, and there's a learning curve. And mistakes are made, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, sorry. And earlier I referenced, Madam Chair, as you'll recall, an error that was committed by the previous Speaker's office. His communication officer commented on what was clearly a political matter, a riding association matter. And, you know, it's a little much for Mr. Cheer to get on his high horse today. And so we'll get some information back, which the clerk has promised us, and we'll be able to weigh in on that. But, Madam Speaker, I'm interested in the future. We've heard a lot today about codifying protocols, clarity, and we've heard about a Nova Scotia study. We've heard about best practices around the world, and I'm just wondering if the Speaker could comment on the thoroughness with which you are going to approach that issue, so that the guidance that you receive can not only guide you, but can guide potentially other speakers throughout the Federation.
Well, thank you, through you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for the question. I think there's a lot of work which the committee can do on this if it was to turn its mind to this issue in terms of comparing how our system stacks up to various other Westminster parliamentary systems. In the UK, for example, the Speaker, once elected as Speaker, of course, completely resigns all partisan affiliations, runs again as an independent. There is a tradition in the UK that the folks who, that the opposing parties agree not to run against that white flag candidate, that neutral candidate as Speaker. In Ghana, for example, when the Speaker is elected from members of Parliament, the Speaker not only resigns party affiliation, actually the Speaker resigns her or his seat in the legislature and now becomes just an officer of Parliament who is not an active politician. We have an interesting system here whereby we do request for our speakers to be impartial. That is entirely correct. Speakers then also have to run again. And they don't run as independents, they run as a member of their party. At least that's been the Canadian tradition. In doing so, they have to do fundraising. There's a number of things, advantages which accrue to being a member of a party as opposed to being an independent member. So that is a very interesting perspective that you're raising.
Madam Speaker, in the few minutes I have left, there was a personal incident that our Speaker was a part of. I don't know if you remember this, Mr. Speaker, but it was a group of women leaders from Winnipeg that was standing just outside the chamber, and you came in. This was the very day that you were elected as our Speaker. There was 2 black women in that group, and they were beaming. They were interested in leadership, perhaps a future call to politics. You've admitted that you may have let some of the wider black community down. Do you acknowledge that as the first black speaker in our history as a country, you have a special responsibility, but you are a symbol to many of the community out there. Just a few reflections from you as I wind down my time.
Through you, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, this is a source of pride for me. It's also a burden. Being the first, you're held to a higher standard, and one which you want to make sure that you lead the way so that you won't be the last. I'm certain not to be the last. This is a very generous country. And we are an incredibly this country has given me so many opportunities, the son of immigrants, to being here, has given an opportunity to so many Canadians and to be welcomed and to be able to run for Parliament for all political formations. It's remarkable. But I also have to say it has been a particular source of pride, a lot of correspondence which I've received as I talked to you about Lionel. He's not the first person to stop me in the street, somebody who doesn't know me, who's never met me before but recognizes the face. It has been a significant achievement for the community. I've made a mistake. I apologize for this mistake. I'm putting in place protocols to making sure that this doesn't happen again.
Thank you.
And I hope to be able to continue to be a symbol for Canada's generosity.
Thank you. Madame.
Mr. Bellefeuille, 6 minutes. Thank you so much. Mr. Fergus, quick summary to make sure we understand everything correctly. You use House resources. You use them poorly, in fact. You recorded a video using House of Commons resources. You recorded that video wearing your Speaker's uniform. You recorded the video by calling yourself Speaker of the House. You left for a trip to Washington during a confidence crisis in the House, questioning your leadership. You didn't consult anyone, and once in Washington, you spoke about your partisan past. You didn't consult your chief of staff. You didn't consult the clerk of the House, and you said earlier that you had apologized. Here's what you said on December 4th, and I quote, "I apologize that this video was used other than its intended purposes." And to the Canadian press, you said on the very same day, "I recognize how this could have been interpreted. In my humble opinion, these are not sincere apologies, unlike those that you made this morning where you recognize a serious lack of judgment." What we understand here, Mr. Fergus, is that there is a lack of judgment after a lack of judgment. And you understand that this has severely undermined the trust we have. Half of parliamentarians have asked you to resign. I don't know what the committee will decide, but I wonder how you will regain half of the parliamentarians' trust after having done what you did. I am a social worker by trade. I understand we learn from our mistakes, but there are no protocols, no manuals, no directives preventing people from having a lack of judgment. And a speaker has to be beyond reproach. Unfortunately, speakers can't make mistakes. Mr. Rhoda learned the hard way. He committed a grave mistake and he had to leave. And so we're here today with you, and I want to tell you that we know you are great. You favor democracy, and I believe that you need to understand that it might be better for you to decide to leave of your own accord, because yes, you committed a mistake, and it's not a small mistake. It is a grave one. I don't know how you think that you're going to be able to regain the trust you've lost. The Bloc Québécois, what happened with you and your surroundings, we can't continue to trust you. So I don't see how you see things rolling out, given the current political context, and having lost the trust of half of the House. How do you see things playing out? With a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of hard work over a long period of time. We know that trust takes time to be won and can be lost in a second. So to regain this trust, I'm going to have to work at it for a long while. If the House of Commons gives me the chance to do so, I will continue to endeavor to regain their trust. The House of Commons has created a process. Part of this process is a study in committee. You're going to submit your recommendations. The recommendations will be looked at by the House, and the House will come to a decision. And I am going to accept this decision. If the House gives me the opportunity to move forward, I will do everything I can to regain Member of Parliament's trust. Mr. Fergus, you are aware that you are creating a precedent here. We asked Mr. Jantz if there were any precedents. He found none. You wish to remain Speaker of the House. If the recommendations allow you to do so, based on this incident, this lack of judgment, we create a precedent. A precedent That will be a basis for advice given to future speakers and will be the basis for any directives given to future speakers. So, by continuing in your role, by not understanding the seriousness of this situation, you still must understand that we're creating a precedent here, and we are lowering the standards for impartiality and for judgment. Because we are lowering the standards that will now be a basis for advice given by clerks. Do you understand what I'm saying? I understand that you believe it to be so, and I recognize my error. I'm putting you in a tough spot here. However, I am doing everything I can at present to avoid such mistakes in the future. And I sincerely apologize that things had to go this far, but I will do everything I can to regain your trust. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Julian, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, if I understand, Mr. Fergus, you're saying that regardless of the recommendations of this committee, that could go from sanctions or penalties to a resignation, you will accept the recommendations if the House of Commons adopts them. Absolutely, Mr. Julian. I will have to accept the process and the decision. I am a servant of the House of Commons, and so if the House decides that they no longer trust me and that I can't regain the trust of members of Parliament, and that the House believes that I no longer can be Speaker, learning from the mistakes I've made, I truly wish to rectify the problem and to regain the trust of the House of Commons, but if the House decides that this isn't possible, that the issue can't be remedied, of course I will leave.
Two things that I'm still trying to understand. First, you testified that on Saturday night you learned of the video in the same way all Canadians did. I want to know the actions you took immediately following that. Did you feel betrayed? Did you contact Mr. Fraser? What did you do in terms of the Liberal convention? And what did you do in terms of your own team, your chief of staff? The clerks have testified, Mr. Jantz testified that you were in contact over that weekend around the apologies. So I need to know what actions you took. And secondly, I wanted to ask in terms of the Washington trip. I mean, we went through this crisis. It was convulsions around the speakership in October. It was profoundly difficult for our Parliament and I think for Canadians. We're in what can be legitimately described as a crisis. Two parties that day, the Bloc Québécois and the Conservative Party, called for your resignation. Did you contemplate cancelling your trip? Because it seems to me in a minority parliament that that kind of situation merits that the Speaker be here in the House of Commons, at the very least, having discussions with members of Parliament.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair. So 2 questions. So regarding what was my reaction on the Saturday night when that video came out, I was obviously sickened. The immediate calls were, how did this happen? This was not supposed to be a video that was supposed to go anything besides to a private gathering. So there was that aspect of it and trying to...
May I ask who you called?
I called my chief of staff, and we started to go through it. I did not personally call Mr. Fraser. And I'll be honest with you, the reason why is that I knew that this was such a situation. I did not want anyone to think that I was calling Mr. Fraser to influence what he would say. I'm going to let the process play out. I knew I had truth on my side, so didn't want to play around with that so that I would be accused afterwards. Did you call Mr. Fraser? Did you try to work things out? Your close friends and the like. Made sure that that did not happen. Regarding the Washington D.C. Trip, Mr. Julian, certainly we did contemplate canceling the trip. We actually went back and forth on this, had a huge discussion on this matter. We realized that perhaps because of the recusal, of course, on a Monday morning at the first opportunity, I recused myself from any matter that would be coming forward to this debate, and I didn't to make sure that I wasn't going to be a part of the decision making as to terms of what the decision of the Deputy Speaker would be. Then we found ourselves saying, okay, well, should we cancel or should we continue with this? We had meetings set up with just over a dozen representatives, senator, and we also had diplomatic meetings that had been canceled beforehand when the previous speaker had resigned. These meetings were set up in terms of the speaker receives diplomats, and some of them are accredited from the United States. There were a couple that had been canceled, so while I was going to be there, going to take up the flame and do that, we didn't want to cancel a second time. So that was the reason why we decided, let's go down to Washington. We'll continue with the responsibilities, and we'll be back in time for the decision by the chair, Deputy Speaker, rather.
This is a minority parliament, and it is unprecedented. What the clerk and the law clerk and the acting deputy clerk, or the deputy clerk, as cited earlier, were majority legislatures. Do you feel that your actions were appropriate responding to the crisis, learning what you learned on Saturday night, given the fact that this is a minority parliament where all parties have to work together?
I thought that the right action immediately was to recuse myself from any determination that would happen. That way members could feel that it was being done fairly. If I had stayed in the chair, it would not have been. There's no possibility that people could have seen that that would have been fair.
Thank you. We're going to go into our fourth round. We will start with 5 minutes to Mr. Calkins, followed by 5 minutes to Mr. Noor Mohammed, Madame de Bellefeuille, et puis Mr. Julian. If we keep it tight, we will do 5 more minutes to the Conservatives, 5 more minutes to the Liberals. Then we'll have a 10-minute health break, and we will start with Mr. Fraser at about 22. Mr. Calkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Fergus, through you, Madam Chair, when exactly did you do the interview with Laura Stone?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll get back to committee. I'll have to check my agenda.
Okay. Mr. Fergus, you've been a member of Parliament now since 2015, if I remember, when you arrived here on Parliament Hill. In the 8 years that you've been a member of Parliament, have you ever had a conversation with any of your communications people, either in your constituency office or in your Hill office, saying, no, we can't send this out because it's not saying something that I want to get into the public domain? Something to that effect. I'm not asking you to name staff. I'm not asking you to name an issue. But have you ever had a conversation with anybody saying we have to be careful what we send out because we don't know if it's going to be in the public domain?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Calkins. Through you, Madam Chair, nothing comes to mind.
So you're saying that you don't vet, or you've never, ever redacted or changed anything that anybody has written or done for you on your behalf as Member of Parliament? You've never made an edit to a letter that's gone out? You've never made an edit to a social media post? You've never done anything to that effect that's going to go out into the public domain?
No, I misunderstood your question. Of course, yes, that has happened several times.
And you do this, I'm presuming, because I do this as a Member of Parliament, because once it leaves my office and leaves my care and control, I have no more control. I have no control over what that message actually is once it leaves my office. And experience teaches you that very early on in your career as a Member of Parliament, does it not, Mr. Fergus?
That is correct, but Mr. Calkins,
no, that's fine.
May I just?
Well,
can I answer your question, sir?
Well, you already did. So, I mean, the premise of my question, I think you'll be able to get to where you want to go as I follow up with you here. So, the entire argument that I'm hearing here at this committee is that things are right or wrong depending on who as the recipient of the information. When we fully know as members of Parliament that anything that we send beyond our care and control of our offices, and in your case, the office of the Speaker, once it leaves, there is no guarantee that it will end up in the public domain. You've just told me, because it's common sense, because every member of Parliament does this, every member of Parliament has this experience, and you are an experienced member of Parliament, that you ought to have known, and you've apologized, and you ought to have known that something like this could end up in the public domain. And so how is it that with that experience, with all the years of experience of sending out correspondence, sending out letters, sending out social media posts, how is it that you didn't consult with somebody in the nonpartisan aspect of your office? And you, sir, have more staff than any other member of Parliament here, except for maybe a ministerial office. You have the most resources out of anybody at this table to help you in the administration of your duties and responsibilities. How is it that nobody in the nonpartisan portion of your office was even asked or approached before you sent this out, even though it's a typical practice for a member of Parliament, even within his own office, to vet these things, knowing full well that they could end up in the public domain? I'm flabbergasted that this happened.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Calkins, it's a difference of kind. I don't know about you, Mr. Calkins, but I'm perhaps have a much lower threshold for when I send out private messages than I do send out public messages. Things which are going to be going out to be published, things that are going out to be displayed publicly. I'm very careful about what is sent out. I'm a lot less cautious in messages that I would send to a longtime friend, or messages I would send to my family, or messages that I would send to even you, Mr. Calkins, if
with the greatest
we
of respect,
corresponding
Mr. Speaker, you
by
weren't sitting in a
text.
lawn chair on the dock at the beach.
Interrupting.
Well,
3 minutes and 30, I get it, it's your time, but I do need the person that we've invited here to provide information to be able to provide information, and that opportunity will be given. Mr. Speaker.
I'm finished with my comments.
Okay, so, I mean, given the fact that you were in your regalia, in your office, doing apparently a personal message, not an official message, you've now tried to reassure us, because the issue is one of confidence and one of trust and one of judgment. You've now you're trying to reassure members of this committee that putting protocols in place will somehow now give you the compass that you need in order to fulfill your job in a nonpartisan way. When the reality is, all you have to do is just stop doing like, how hard is it to stop doing something that's partisan? Like, it's not that you need protocols in how you do things. You just need to stop doing some things.
Okay.
How hard is that?
Thank you. I think it's a rhetorical question. Really short.
Well, if it is not hard to stop doing partisan activities, and this certainly wasn't a partisan activity. And as I also mentioned, the intention was not for it to be at a partisan activity. It was to be a goodbye for a longtime friend. But that being said, Madam Speaker, that is the reason why protocols are going to be put in place. All communications coming out of my office will be going through this process.
Thank you. Mr. Nur Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, for being here with us today. I was struck by the comments. Mr. Scheer's not here, regrettably, but I was struck by his comments about partisan actions by speakers. And I recall that Mr. Scheer, during his time, just prior to his time as becoming Speaker, had money from his EDA transferred under his watch to engage in questionable robocalls, and then when he became Speaker, refused to recuse himself and did not let the House know that he had been involved in this. So I'm sure that the same response that Liberal members of Parliament at that time gave him, which was the benefit of the doubt, I am sure our Conservative colleagues will extend the same courtesy to you for something that is, I would argue, far less egregious. So, and I noted that after he became Speaker, he continued to serve on the board of his EDA. So we all make mistakes in life, and some people are generous of spirit, and they are able to move on in the interest of all Canadians, and I'm sure Conservatives will do the same. I want to talk a little bit about the question that was asked of you earlier about your relationship with Mr. Fraser, and Mr. Gerritsen spent a little bit of time on this. Did you see this as a partisan thing, or did you see this as doing something for someone that you cared about as a human being?
Well, thank you for the question through you, Madam Chair. Clearly the latter, but in retrospect, it also comes to me, and looking at this, is that I could see how talking about, revisiting my past, talking about a partisan activity that happened in my past would be seen by members who do not share that same past, could be seen as a way of making a comment about today, and that is why I truly am sorry that this video had been recorded.
And you've said you're sorry many times, and I think many of us will accept that apology. But I want to know, if Mr. Fraser had been a Conservative and he had been your role model or someone that you had had a deep relationship with, would you have been as comfortable recording such a message?
I would have.
And if he'd been a New Democrat?
Absolutely.
Or a member of the Bloc?
Absolutely.
So for you, this was not about being partisan?
No, it's about the relationship. I have close personal friends, as many as all, I'd even say probably all of us do, close, dear personal friends who have the wide swath of political allegiances. I also have friends who have no political allegiance whatsoever. It was done under that understanding. That being said, the Speaker has to be held to a higher standard, and I recognize that. And I'm certainly I'm in the hands of members, but I hope that they would understand that it was not an error of intention, but is one that certainly I'll make sure that we put in processes in place to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
Thank you. I want to read from a decision that was issued by Mr. Scheer, or a statement of Mr. Scheer when he was Speaker. And he said, and I quote, "Another one of our time-honored traditions is that of respect for the office of Speaker." And he goes on to say, O'Brien and Boskin, page 313, state that, and I quote, "Reflections on the character or actions of the Speaker, an allegation of bias, for example, could be taken by the House as breaches of privilege and punished accordingly." And I put that, I start with that because I reflect on something that was said to me when I was elected to this office, and that is that people of color are treated sometimes differently when you get to this place. And it's an uncomfortable thing for us to talk about, but it's an important thing for us to talk about because we are, for better or for worse, role models for others. And we are, for better or for worse, sometimes the front line for things that happen outside of this place. But this place is no different, sadly. And sometimes things in this place, when it comes to matters of diversity, are worse. And so my question to you, in the context of that statement by Mr. Scheer and the quote from page 313, do you think that you are treated or have been treated differently as somebody who is a person of color in the process of becoming Speaker and since you have become Speaker?
To the chair, through the chair, to the member, that is not something that I am able to pronounce on. That is not something that I'm able to pronounce on.
I think that says a lot about you and your character as a person. And I thank you for that answer because I think it's important for us to hope that we are treated fairly and reasonably, regardless of how we got here.
I'm gonna, sorry, but the beep's gonna go off in 3 seconds.
All right, thank you.
I appreciate your kindness for that understanding. 2.5 minutes. 2 minutes et demi, Madame de Bellefeuille, suivi par Mr. Julian.
And then Mr. Julian. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Fergus, this is not an easy meeting for you. Today you apologize formally for having had a lapse of judgment. You did it before us and before everybody who listens to us, the journalists. It's not easy to say that you had a lapse of judgment. You said, and I will be honest, that I will always doubt you. This is not a learning mistake. This is a judgment mistake. And this, you can put in place policies, and maybe that will help you to make less mistakes. But it tells me a lot about your capacity to rise above the rest as the chair and have the confidence of the House. It doesn't have anything to do with you as a person. You're a good person, perhaps, but you perhaps do not occupy the right position for you, because what you did undermined the confidence of the 32 deputy members of the bloc. And you also mentioned it, that you were closely surveilled. You told me that. I had doubt.
In 3 minutes, I have to stop
you
the
were
feed
elected,
and then
and
start
my
back
doubts were
up
confirmed.
with the House of Commons
Every
live.
time that you will now make a decision or do something, I will doubt you. I will wonder whether you're not speaking to the government behind our backs. We don't want the chair of the House to be also a leader of his party. We don't want you to be partial. We want you to be really non-partisan. And I'm very sad to tell you that the members of the bloc will never be able to trust you again. This is very sad, but I would like you to think about what I'm telling you, because when you're going to go back to the House, it will be difficult for you to realize that a lot of members have lost trust in you. And this is not easy to say. I hope that you will make the right decisions after the recommendations of this committee are published. Thank you. Mr. Julian.
And I wanted to thank you, Mr. Fergus, for coming to committee. I'm satisfied with some of your answers. I will say, quite frankly, I'm not satisfied with other answers. What I have clearly understood from your testimony is that you understand that this committee has to go through a process that ultimately could be decided by the House of Commons, but that you are ready to accept the conclusions of the committee, whether we're talking about penalties or potentially just going to ask for your resignation. You are prepared to heed the results of this committee inquiry. Am I right?
I'm through you, Madam Chair. I'm prepared to heed the decision of the House, which would, I'm assuming, concur with the decision of the committee.
That is important. I would ask you, because I only have about a minute left. There are a number of documents that I think would be very useful to this committee. We've asked Mr. Jantz as well to provide them. And the reality is all of that really we need to receive today, because the timelines in the House order, as you know, are very short. We have to report back by Thursday, which means basically we have to draft this report and conclude by tomorrow. So I would ask that those documents, those answers that remain unanswered,
Okay,
if
everybody,
you
I'm
can
gonna
endeavor
shut
to
the
do that
channel
in the coming
down,
hours,
and I will be
that would
rebooting
be,
back
that would
up
be very
with the House
helpful.
of Commons in 15 minutes.
I
We'll
think
see
it
you
is
there.
fair to say